Am I live? I might be live. Looks like it. Hello, everyone. So this is an experimental format because I was planning to do some streams when I got everything up and running, and I decided to start out today because I've been wanting to document the fall of my country in real time. We all need an outlet for cathartic expression in these dire circumstances. And the thing that's radicalized me is I just spent a couple of weeks, as those who watched my Japan video or read my article either on Substack or Courage Media, places where you can also support me, for which I would be grateful, will know, I just spent 2 weeks strolling up mountains and eating my body weight in Wagyu beef in Kyoto, and I've been spoiled by the clean, efficient, affordable, and pleasant public transport system in Japan, and the high-trust, homogenous, ethnically and culturally coherent culture that I visited. And upon landing back in Heathrow, I was immediately greeted by the sights, sounds, and smells of the UK, and man, is it despondent. And if you just look at the headlines, every day now, it is just another completely preventable atrocity inflicted upon us by people who didn't need to be here, and a political class who are wedded to this idea of battery farming anyone from everywhere in a small island nation, cheek by jowl with the natives, despite the number of crimes that these newcomers commit and the danger it places our children in. Probably because their children aren't in any danger. They just. But even then, I'm not sure that they wouldn't, in Mayan fashion, just sacrifice their own children at the altar of multiculturalism. If you aren't aware what I'm talking about, we're going to go through a few examples. The first being this one. An arrest has been made after a man dies in triple stabbing. Who did the stabbing? You don't get any information out of the BBC's tweet, and you get basically none of it out of their article. As per usual, the BBC buries the lead with this. Dog walker dies in triple stabbing as arrest made. So a man, a nondescript man from nowhere in particular, chased another man and a 14-year-old boy down the street, and a dog walker who tried to intervene in the altercation ended up getting stabbed to death. The others have, I believe, suffered wounds and have been taken to hospital. It seems to be non-lethal. 14-year-old boy was taken to hospital with knife wounds, but his injuries were not life-threatening or changing. So we can see here, a 22-year-old Afghan national was tasered and arrested on suspicion of murder and attempted murder after the incident at Midhurst Gardens, Uxbridge, at 5 o'clock on Monday. Now, not long ago, the BBC article said this. A 22-year-old man, just a man, nondescript man from nowhere in particular, he's British as you and me, was tasered and arrested on suspicion of murder and attempted murder. So, why did they feel the need to omit his nationality? Until, of course, social media had quite the outcry. This has already gotten a decent bit of traction in the time. Why would they feel the need to omit the fact that he is Afghan? Well, it's because there doesn't need to be a single Afghan in Britain, let alone Afghan criminals. There doesn't need to be a single foreign criminal in your country. And if they demark this person by their nationality or their ethnicity, you will realise what is being done to you. All of these things are a choice. It is a choice that has been made for you by politicians who are content to endanger your life to indulge in their ideological fantasies. And we'll go through the motivations of this later on, but I just want to catalogue all the examples that have happened in the last few weeks. So, the reason why this is happening, with Afghan nationals in particular, remember Afghans and Eritreans are 20 times more likely per capita to commit a sex offence than the natives, is because the government saw fit to smuggle under cover of night because someone at Ministry of Defence accidentally leaked an email with a list of Afghan collaborators on it. Smuggle in thousands of Afghans, whether they were interpreters or just people claiming to have helped the military, and these included Taliban fighters and drug dealers and the extended clan networks of Afghans, because a human rights lawyer and judge in Britain declared that if you're from that part of the world where, people marry their cousins and siblings, the family has a very different meaning. And we can't judge and be prejudiced, of course, about the quality of one's family composition. We can't draw conclusions as to what kind of society that might produce, whether or not you have generations, thousands of years of incest and the impulse control and the downward pressure on IQ that might cause. Of course not, that would be racist. Instead, because family has a different meaning, a lot more close-knit and interconnected and widespread among these Biradiri clans, you can bring up to 20 of your relatives. So for every person, Afghan informant, Taliban fighter, that is brought to this country, usually male militants, they can bring up to 20 family members. So there might have been hundreds of thousands of Afghans off the books imported into our country who are now just milling about at our expense and committing crimes. And the government is totally content with that state of affairs. No problem whatsoever, because yet again, their kids aren't the ones endangered. Now let's move to Habash Kabatu. You remember this chap, Hadush Kabatu, the Ethiopian immigrant who arrived in Britain and within 8 days attempted to sexually assault, a 14-year-old girl after he'd wandered out of a corner shop that he was being led around in by one of his handlers. He was staying at the migrant hotel, the Bell Hotel, in Epping, which is what sparked those protests all across the summer and then spawned the Pink Ladies movement. Because when they protested outside the Britannia Hotel in Canary Wharf, there was also another dead-eyed African illegal migrant who was wandering the streets, breaking into a blind woman's home, and then her daughter decided to defend herself by marching down to the hotel armed and demanding what the hell was going on, and she was the one who was prosecuted first before the would-be African assailant. Well, Hadesh Kabatu was convicted of trying to sexually assault this 14-year-old girl. The reason I've got this court ruling up here is because you have to understand exactly what the judiciary are doing to us. So if you read this ruling, under the considerations, they say that Hadush Kabatu is of good character. The man who tried to sexually assault the 14-year-old girl and prey on other women as well, that weren't named in this specific suit, but had said, yeah, he tried it on with me as well, after 8 days of being in our country, after breaking in, of course, is apparently of good character according to the judiciary. And this is what the defence and the judge presiding over the case both agreed on. The prosecution have helpfully put evidence before the court to assist in determining whether Mr. Kabatu has any previous convictions or cautions in any of the countries he may have passed through on his way to the UK. Pause. Any of the countries he may have passed through on his way to the UK. Right, so he was shopping around for asylum applications, presumably either because he could get more money in our country or because the teenagers were more appealing. And so he broke into various countries before breaking into ours and being put up in holiday accommodation at our expense, and then decided to repay our gratitude by trying to molest a child. Whether or not he has convictions in those countries is still to be determined, because as we know from, I think his name was like Lawangin Abdullah Ramazala, or whatever it was, the murderer of Thomas Roberts, the aspiring Marine, who he stabbed over a dispute with an e-scooter. He had already killed 2 other illegal migrants in Serbia with a Kalashnikov, shot them dead, and then arrived in our country and claimed to be a child, and so wasn't subjected, per his human rights, to a dental examination, because if he would have been examined, we would have known that he was wanted by Interpol for double murder. And then he went on to, chase children around the school with a knife, he brought prostitutes back to his flat, he threatened his foster parents, and then he went in and killed an aspiring Marine, the kind of young lad that makes this country a better place, kind of valiant patriot that we actually want in the country, rather than being replaced by Afghan stabby terrorists. So the idea that Mr. Kabatu doesn't have any previous convictions, why the hell should we take this attempted child molester's word for it? Because the justice system affords him unlimited amounts of grace, because they believe in his human rights, because they believe that deep down, this attempted child molester is exactly the same as you and me. It's just the accident of geography, or material privation, or a lack of lectures on women's rights, which, of course, the government is now providing to men in hotels, generously at your and my expense. Those are the only reasons why he's different from you and me. They say, it is accepted by both sides that the relevant authorities have no record of any matters of his previous convictions, despite the fact he broke into our country and paid an entire people smuggling network who advertise our women and girls as the spoils of war on TikTok and Instagram in order to do so. I accept that it would not be misleading to treat Mr. Kabatu as being of good character in the circumstances. I don't think anyone who has committed a sexual offence on a child can ever be of good character. It doesn't matter whether or not he has been caught trying to do things at other times. It doesn't matter whether or not that you think the means of his arrival was just irregular rather than illegal and also immoral, because I would never dream of breaking into someone else's country. I think the attempted child molestation makes him not of good character. And I think, funnily enough, that people's actions are not disconnected from their habits. You know, the things that have formed their life leading up to that one given moment where they made the difficult decision, as we often do in our lives, whether or not to approach a child and make a sexual advance on them. Funnily enough, most of us have not only never had that urge, but I'm assuming pretty much everyone has resisted that temptation. Kabatu failed that challenge, yet the judiciary thinks that's testament to his good character. Yet again, we are what we continually do, and so the implication that he's never done this before, well, I think he's probably just never been caught. We also don't know what he has done in the various migrant camps and countries he's stayed in, so we don't know whether or not he had any disputes with his fellow GDP rocket fuel in waiting. But no, apparently the judiciary thinks this is evidence of his good character. And they say, good character is not a defence to the charge. However, evidence of good character counts in Mr. Kabatu's favour in two ways. It supports his credibility, and so he should be considered more likely to be telling the truth. And it may mean that he is less likely to have committed the offence. Well, he got convicted anyway. So can we retroactively consider that he's not of good character when he tried to molest a child? Well, his good character may mean something, and the good character of all of the would-be sex offenders that have broken into our country that's just sort of milling about in our town centres. Because he broke out of prison. And, sorry, I should correct myself. He was allowed to escape custody by the incompetent guards, the police officers, and the immigration services that failed to communicate by handing him over to the people that were meant to deport him, and they just let him go. He actually went back to the prison multiple times asking, is someone going to collect me? And they just shooed him away. So he decided to just, mill about on the street. Funnily enough, he immediately found a group of other rocket scientists, doctors, and engineers in waiting to provide him with help. Now, I would immediately ask this person why he looks like he's wearing a prison tracksuit, but that didn't spring to the minds of these scholars in question, and instead they decided to help him, probably out of a sense of ethnic solidarity. Not only why is this man in my country in the first place, why has he... Well, deportation is the moderate option. In this instance, I would refer you to the Gospel of Matthew verse about millstones and what we should do to people who try to lead little children astray. But why are people who would give him cover because of his skin colour in my country either? None of the people in this picture, including the Deliveroo cyclist who's, of course, comically just in the shot behind them, none of these people should be here. And yet they are. Is this not the face of the future of Britain? It says, a blunder, according to The Sun, sparked a frantic manhunt for the Ethiopian national, who was at the time at large in London. He was then found in David Lammy's constituency. Poetic irony. He was just walking along Chelmsford High Street before getting on a train. He's doing a sort of Michael Portillo tour across London. Just out running errands. He even went and bought himself an avocado tote bag. And there's the footage. He's just walking for the library. Probably swatting up before his legal exam. And the Met Police, by the way, this is the most surveilled city pretty much in the world, London. Met Police capable of kicking your door down in the dead of night because you sent an anti-Hamas meme in the case of Pete North. Couldn't find this guy. I suppose it's because for quite some time his co-ethnics were harbouring him. Couldn't find him for a very long time. Dangerous child predator, just strolling about the streets. Police had initially let him go. Police couldn't find him, had to appeal to the public. It reminds me of the Clapham alkali attacker just a year or so ago. Let me get that up, because same situation. I'm getting deja vu about the number of foreign predators we had in our country. He was the Afghan national, another Afghan illegal asylum seeker, a fake migrant, Abdullah Zaidi. That was it. So the asylum seeker in question had committed a sexual offence, I think it was in 2016, and had been scheduled for deportation and had frustrated his deportation with multiple appeals. And then he had claimed to be a Christian, claimed to have converted, and some treacherous priest had, or vicar, whatever it was, had signed off on his conversion and its sincerity. And so he got to stay in our country on the grounds that he would face religious persecution as a Southern Christian, were he to go back to Afghanistan. Despite this, he had a Muslim funeral. Here we go. This is what I wrote on it at the time. I'm just going to try and drag that across here. Again, sorry for the scuffed nature of this, and I will get round to any super chats that I receive or questions. Yeah, this was what I wrote for the European Conservative at the time. Zaidi was a convicted sex criminal who was denied asylum twice after smuggling himself aboard a lorry, and then he gained the right to remain by the Home Office around 2021 to 2022. Neither the Catholic Diocese nor the Church of England had a record of his conversion, and his friends said he was a good Muslim who had planned to return to Afghanistan to find a wife. So yeah, not fleeing for his life. Like many of the Afghans that we let in, or Germany let in, they just go back to the dystopic hellhole in which they're apparently fleeing torture and persecution for a holiday. They're going on a jolly. I'm so glad I'm taking refugees from places where they're just happy to piss off back to whenever it suits them, but then they come over here for free shoes and free phones and free hotels, and to attempt to attack our wives, sisters, mothers, and daughters. Bear in mind, this was also the same story from the Liverpool taxicab bomber. That's Emad al-Swialmin. I'm sorry for butchering these names for your ears, but I'm not sorry to these people and the countries that produce them, because I should never have to speak this like black tongue of Baradur in the first place. Do you know the amount of like hadiths and Quran verses that I've been reading over the course of the last year or so to really swat up on Islam, to understand the mentality of these third world savages that keep breaking into my society and stabbing children? I should never have had to raid this mystical bullshit in the first place in order to understand the goings-on in my own country. But because they have been brought here by a treacherous political class who literally thinks they are indistinguishable from me, whose ancestors have built this country for thousands of years, who keeps the historical religion that made our nuclear families and our beautiful cathedrals, our thriving high-trust culture, that exported, let's say, a preferable culture of not burning widows or raping children around the world. Apparently, Abdul Zaidi, or Habash Kabatu, is exactly the same as me. The blank slate is the most pernicious delusion imaginable. Actually, you know what, I'll skip to this post. This is absolutely egregious. So this is by Lisa McKenzie. Lisa I've debated before on GB News, and total waste of my time. She couldn't actually grasp sort of like second order effects. Like, I would say, out from the premise of, oh, okay, fatherlessness in the home is connected to higher levels of crime. Disproportionately, black boys, especially black Caribbean boys, so Windrush generation types, have high levels of fatherlessness. They also have higher levels of crime. That may be somewhat connected. I don't know the reason why this population commits crime literally every single country it lives in, and the implications are, they don't fill me with hope, let's put it that way. But let's at least tackle the potential cultural and sociological effects before we draw more dire conclusions in order to reduce crime. Let's ensure that we don't give welfare to take fathers out of the home, so we put less stress on schools and we have less dead white and black boys, because of course black males stab each other and white males at far higher proportions than European and Heritage American, Australian, New Zealander and English populations tend to do. I mean, one of the most radicalizing statistics that I've seen is that in America, black women have a higher murder rate than white men. Okay, again, doesn't fill me with hope. Lisa didn't understand that. She was saying, why on earth would you draw a connection? Are you really saying that fatherlessness in the homes causes more problems in school? It's like, oh, the amount of time and energy that is spent on not just babysitting the third world, but trying to explain basic concepts to total low IQ'd retards that also vote and therefore think they're entitled to the same opinion as you or I, is painful. We could, yet again, we could be colonizing Mars right now if we weren't holding the hands of these stupid, pathologically altruistic vandals of our civilization. But the reason I bring this up, not because she's particularly relevant, but because she is emblematic of the liberal mindset. Understand this is what these people believe. It is an article of faith for them. Internalize it. Have the theory of mind of what your enemy thinks. And I quote, thread. I'm going to say something that no one will appreciate, but hear me out. I feel a bit sorry for Hadush Kabatu. He has no skills or understanding to cope in the UK. He wouldn't have been able to come into the country through any other means but illegally. Okay, he shouldn't fucking be here. Shouldn't be here. The foregone conclusion is not this child predator's presence in my country. The foregone conclusion is him milling about under a tree in the Horn of Africa waiting for time to happen without the hope of ever preying on our children. Can you get that through your thick skull? And I'm sorry, I don't normally swear and I'm not normally insulting unless it's to Big John, the glutton in chief. But I'm sick to the back teeth of these people thinking that they can demonstrate their unending well of altruism while also putting our lives and the lives of our children and family members in danger. So fuck them. Lisa McKenzie. Like most illegal migrants, they will struggle to integrate. They won't find anywhere to live that isn't taxpayer funded. Forced onto the streets or slums, they will work in the black economy, probably exploited. The public don't want them here, adding to their exclusion. Just fact, yeah, the public don't want them here, so they shouldn't be here. They shouldn't be here. The goal is not selling battery farming African rapists to the public. The goal should be not having a single African rapist in our country. Yes, we have rapists of our own. That means don't add to the pile of rapists. She says, there is a lucrative industry of hotels, smugglers, taxis, food providers, NGOs, lawyers coining it in. Anyone who thinks they are being kind by not recognizing any of this are not kind. This situation has to be stopped. Yes, it does. It has to be stopped by deporting the ones already here and not letting any more in. Turns out that your compassion to Hadush Kabatu, the African rapists, is cruelty to his 14-year-old English victims. And I know who I'm siding with. I'm siding with the child who shouldn't be preyed upon, not the African rapists, Lisa. So I responded to this with a quote retweet. Understand what we're up against. Liberals actually believe that foreign criminals only prey on children because they lack affordable housing and gainful employment. The lack of pool tables for the youth, I'm sure. As if heinous crimes are something you do to pass the time, or create it. See my Africa Time video. Understand how entrenched this theory of mind is. The blank slate is an article of faith for these people. There is no limit to the children they will endanger to prove everyone is equal deep down. Such an observation, of course, got me blocked. Because even though they externalize this article of faith, this false anthropology of the blank slate, remember, you noticing it is itself the problem. The problem is never the African sex offenders that are coming into your country and committing crimes against your children. The problem is only ever you noticing the problem. Because, and I recommend everyone read Emily Finley's Ideology of Democratism here. It's a good book that explains the sort of liberal mindset through the evolution of philosophy from Rousseau right up to Leo Strauss and the neoconservatives and the Bush regime change doctrine of the early 2000s. They believe that everyone is fundamentally free and equal. We originated in something akin to the Garden of Eden. This is why we could rationally come together and organize our societies along the lines of the social contract. That, according to Rousseau, the first man who picked up the first rock and said, "This is mine," introduced inequality into the world as a kind of fallenness or sin. And that ever since, the job of the liberal state is to bring everyone back together, as if compressing us in this giant meatball that we can stack neatly on Parliament Green, to redistribute resources, to sufficiently educate us into liberal ideology, and make us realize this latent egalitarian nature that lies underneath centuries of sediment, of cultural differences, of economic disparities, of arbitrary geographic distances. And so, if they just bring everyone here, if they give them lessons on women's consent, if they give them social housing and job opportunities, suddenly, all differences in ancestry and IQ and culture and deeply held convictions, the metaphysical doctrines of good and evil, will just fall away. And we will all be indistinguishable. We will live in John Lennon's Imagine. That is what these people believe. And so the only impediment to that utopia is you and me noticing differences, noting the disparities in criminality between immigrant populations and their descendants. Because, unfortunately, and again, fills me with pessimism, the second and third generation immigrants, largely, repeat the economic and criminal patterns of their parents. Whether it's out of spite or out of habit, people often create the conditions of their ancestral homelands in other countries. Again, not everybody, because pretty much everyone has a friend of different immigrant heritage. However, also not all immigrants are equal. If you are a European ancestral immigrant, you're going to have an easier time integrating into other countries and cultures, including the ones that are most distant from your own, out of a basic sense of decency and respect, than immigrants from the third world. All of these are observations that should be palpably true to everyone. They were obvious to our grandfathers. They were obvious to everyone up until the last few decades, where we all had to pretend the blank slate was real, otherwise you would be called the second incarnation of Adolf Hitler. And so I am still marveled at the fact that anyone listens to me at all. Why do I earn a modest, very modest, by the way, living saying palpably obvious truths that everyone should already know? Because people are as insane as this to actually believe that people only commit sexual offences against children because they have nothing better to do with their time because the state hasn't given them a job yet. When we make it out of this, if we do, of course, when we make it out of this, I have hope, not optimism, because hope is a Christian virtue and optimism is cowardice. I think it was Spengler that says that. We will look back on this, and our ancestors will look back on this, as a time of unprecedented delusion and suicidality. And the best illustration of this, I'll go to my own Twitter feed, which you should be following, by the way, because I do put some bangers out on occasion. But there was a video a couple of days ago from when UKIP, or what's left of it, the sort of remnants of UKIP after Nigel Farage left. Here we go. The remnants of UKIP marched through Whitechapel. You know, the area that has been turned into a Bengali slum with the largest mosque in the country, East London Mosque. UKIP decided to do a remigration march for it. I think it was cancelled after a certain point. But the typical Muhammad Hijab-esque thugs turned out wearing masks, obviously starving, hungry, and decided to march shouting Takfir, Allah Akbar. And their useful idiot Socialist Worker Party, Stand Up to Racism, communist collaborators were rather upset by this. They were upset by the optics of it, of course, but they're also upset by the fact that a intractable tribal religious prior reared its ugly head when they just want to reduce everything down to material differences because they believe if they rectify those material differences via a Leviathan state, we will all return to the state of nature that Rousseau promised. They themselves aren't as learned in their own philosophy in these terms, by the way. I've just had to do a lot of reading to understand the mindset that these imbeciles have learned and are reciting in terms of coach slogans in order to destroy my country with open borders. They're acting as the handmaidens to a caliphate and they don't even know it. The best part of this is, and I'll put the desktop audio on here, is that when they were chanting this, one particular idiot, one student politician in question, decided to denounce it and say, "Oh, we're on the same side, brother." And he got quite the rude awakening from the client group that he's important.
There's no need for that. We're on the same side, bro.
No, we're not.
Yes, we are, bro.
Bro.
You know, it would be funny if it were just these people that were going to bear the brunt of their delusions. But as I pointed out, look, this is how the alliance between the left and the communists will play out. Third world thugs are going to turn my country into Lebanon or South Africa, and then the communist radicals who have thought they were ushering in a utopia where we can all sing Kumbaya or whatever the tofu-eating secular version is, will then find themselves on the wrong end of a rope and a crane. Meanwhile, the indigenous majority, the patriots who are aghast at this and have voted against it, in every referendum and election when consulted, are left out of the conversation entirely. We don't get a say in the dispossession of our own country by intractably awful tribal 7th century barbarians or deranged and demented communists who want to level every human difference in an impossible project of erecting an egalitarian utopia. So anyway, back to Kabatu, because this is important. So he got captured, and he was met up within a Finsbury Park. Yes, near the famous mosque. if you're thinking that. And one of the worst bits of this, and this is, so he was captured by 2 female police officers because it was a really bright idea to send 2 female police officers after a notorious immigrant sex offender who looks like the reincarnation of Purple Aki. The details of this story are just embarrassing because I think it was Carl who said this, but he didn't know he was on the run. He was just like wandering around like a rapey Mr. Bean in the suburbs of London, just running errands. And it's because these people have no conscience. They don't understand second-order consequences. They have the memory of a goldfish because they're just not intelligent, because they don't think like us, because to the extent to which they have conscious religious convictions, they believe that all morality is predestined, everything's written on a stone tablet up in Islamic heaven, and that if you do anything to someone outside the Ummah, then of course you suffer no moral consequences for that because Allah only extends moral consideration to his people. But they truly believe that everything is preordained, and so it doesn't matter what they do. As long as they keep their faith, insofar as they're conscious of that, because, you know, cousin marriage tends to have a downward pressure on your ability to think about consequences, they actually believe that all of the depraved acts they commit are just tickety-boo in the eyes of their creator. And so they're not going to stop, and they're not going to show remorse. They're incapable of it. Some of them don't actually think. If they can't rotate 3D shapes in their mind, they can't have a complex understanding of how their victims might feel about their heinous crimes. Go back to Ross Kemp's interaction with the 3 rapists in Africa, where he's trying to get them to understand how the victim of their rape might feel. And he said, do you think there's anything wrong with this? And they go, yeah, because, you know, you might get attacked by a brother or a dad or something if you get caught, or you might get an STD, or she might scream and bring the attention of the village to you, or she might get pregnant, you have to deal with a baby. And it's like, okay, the only consequences they can conceive of are momentary inconveniences to them gratifying their disgusting desires. So any interaction with the justice system, for example, it feels unjust to them because they can't understand why someone else is getting in the way of them getting what they want. Like, they can't think one step out from, I need to gratify myself right now. And in here, the Met Police said Kabatu was arrested on suspicion of being unlawfully at large and would be taken into a London prison. One eyewitness said he was walking his dog in Finsbury Park when he spotted Kabatu being led away by a number of officers. Jack Neil Hall, age 40, told PA News, I knew that he'd last been seen in the Hackney area and I thought, oh, that looks awfully like that guy. He's not wearing the same clothes, but it looks like him. He wasn't struggling. He was just walking quite calmly, a bit dejectedly. He was staring down, he had his hood up, but it was a calm situation. It was a leisurely stroll out of the park with him, his hands cuffed, but he wasn't trying to get away. The Met said a member of the public tipped off police that they'd spotted a man they believed could be Kabatu at a bus stop near Finsbury Park Station at 8 o'clock in the morning on Sunday. Officers were sent to the area and found him 16 minutes later. Kabatu was seen led away in handcuffs by police wearing different clothes to the prison-issue grey tracksuit he had been spotted in on Friday evening. There was a bit in here that just said that he just hadn't been expecting to be happened upon by anyone, but he was also in no great panic because, like, he doesn't think anything's going to be happening next. Why are we having these people in our country? Not just because they're committing crimes, because they have this mentality. How can you build a civilization with people for whom consequences do not exist? Like, the reason that we want a ethnically and culturally homogenous country with, yes, the ability to accommodate a handful of exceptions, but exceptions do not disprove rules, and so exceptions in foreign civilizations who might be compatible with our tribe, as in able to marry into our civilization, should not be the standard by which we make immigration policy, because otherwise those countries, if everyone were the exception, would look like our country, but they don't, and so we can infer from the state of a country from the outside, like Ethiopia or Afghanistan, that most of the people in that civilization are horrible people who are incompatible with our country and should never be allowed in. If we want, the reason we want that, ethnically and culturally homogenous country, is because it creates a kind of psychic comfort blanket where everyone around you is predictable, and so you can kind of turn your brain off to an extent. Like, for those of you who don't live in London, I can't tell you just how wary you have to be walking around. And it's not just because I have been recognised frequently, and that's not me trying to say, oh, I'm a big deal. I'm not. I'm, as the meme would go, a niche internet micro-celebrity. Though that being said, we are scant for talent on the British right, and it really is basically like me, Harrison Pitt, Charlie Downs, Lewis Bragpool, and a couple of other honourable mentions that I respect. So, you know, if you're in these circles, you get recognised a fair bit. Anyway, it's not just because I'm concerned that someone's going to pick me out of the crowd and take issue with something I don't like and act on their low impulse control with the knife that they're probably carrying with them at all times. But you just have to have your head on a swivel and your music on low and your phone in your pocket, because you don't know if there's going to be an e-bike coming up behind you with 2 GDP contributors wearing balaclavas ready to snatch your phone out your hand. Or, as we saw with the Afghan earlier today, and this is the footage in question where the police happen upon him, but there is other footage taken by someone from their window. If someone's just going to randomly attack you, you don't know what kind of insane freaks have been unleashed in your civilization by the permissive anti-racist policing policies. Especially when, again, very uncomfortable conversation when we talk about the non-sociological problems that arise from ethnic disparities, especially when black individuals in Britain have a rate of diagnosed schizophrenia 10 times that of white men. And that's despite us constantly hearing about the disparities that non-Indigenous communities have with interacting with mental health and general health services. So even when they have fewer interactions because of apparently a community stigma or access to healthcare or whatever other sociological reason that your typical midwit liberal or socialist throws up for expanding the ever-growing NHS budget, despite fewer interactions with mental health services, it's still a rate of schizophrenia 10 times that the white population. That's not even the native British population, because we don't do breakdowns by ethnicity in our country for some insane reason. So, yeah, you should be worried in diverse cities, because you never know when some violent miscreant is going to happen upon you. You never know when someone like Hadash Kabatu is just wandering around in your civilization because the police have let him loose. And one of the worst things about this is our political class think it's funny. So David Lammy, Britain's mastermind, who's now the Deputy Prime Minister and the Justice Secretary, decided to cackle with laughter when Robert Jenrick got up and said, this man has been let free on Labour's watch. Now, David Lammy was trying to make a point about the Tories being complicit in this problem too, because he listed off a number of foreign criminals that were mistakenly released, or just general criminals, mistakenly released under Conservative watch. And yeah, I agree, the Tories are total traitors as well. I told this to Michael Gove to his face, actually, in the debate footage that he has decided to bury. And there'll be an announcement on further action on that later, because I'm sorry, but when have I ever done anything quietly? They have broken a written agreement, and I would never have participated in that debate about immigration with Michael Gove and Catherine Birbalsingh if I thought they would have the chance to bury the footage and have it never see the light of day. It's also just, very discourteous to break a written agreement like that. But I'll be trying to do everything I can to make sure that sees the light of day. But yeah, the Tories are total traitors, and they inflicted world historical levels of migration on us from the culturally incompatible and violent third world, and they should never be forgiven. But just David Lammy thinking this is funny. That's what they think of this. They think that their delusional blank slate beliefs are the zenith of morality, that any dissent from that is literally creating inequality by speaking disparities into being, that we would live in an egalitarian utopia if not for the far right who notice these differences, and that when you point out to them that their reckless demographic experiment is getting children assaulted and killed, they laugh at you. They think this is funny. Look at them all snickering on the front bench. Whether it's effective, whether it's exaggerated, whether it's just trying to make a show for the cameras and for their utterly immoral base, doesn't matter. This is what they think of you. Believe them when they do this. There's another example. And I'll try not to go on too long, but honestly, it's really depressing. And we need to go through all these. This is Deng Chol Majek from Sudan. Again, another, honestly, quite soulless, uncanny valley monster. If you would have told me this is a screenshot from a game that PewDiePie was playing in the mid-2000s and screaming at in a little camera in the top right-hand corner, I'd believe you. Deng Chol Majek from Sudan, who should have been stuck in the Horn of Africa with nothing better to do, instead followed a 27-year-old migrant hotel worker called Rhiannon Sky White home after her shift. Apparently, it's because he was arguing with another hotel migrant, we're putting up our expense, over a packet of biscuits, and felt disrespected when Rhiannon, doing her job, had stepped in. And so he followed her to the train platform, and he stabbed her 23 times, 11 times in the skull, with a screwdriver and killed her. Rhiannon has a 5-year-old son. She died 3 days later from brainstem trauma. So this is a woman who took a job trying to be compassionate to these foreign criminals. And again, I know people will make disparaging remarks here saying that, you know, she is perpetuating in the system that is putting these people up at our expense. And yes, I agree, you should never take money from these firms. Credit to Premier Inn, by the way. They're the one hotel chain in the country that has refused all fake asylum seeker contracts. And so if you want to stay somewhere in Britain where you can be guaranteed they've never taken the blood money for these people, you know, Premier Inn. But she didn't deserve this. Her son certainly didn't deserve to lose his mother. And this guy was then caught on CCTV, leaving the station, his trainers covered in blood, went into a corner shop, bought some alcohol, and had a party in his hotel room, and was shocked when the police car showed up. Yet again, these people don't understand consequences. They don't think beyond their immediate urges. He said, I saw blue lights of the police car, can't even speak English, but I didn't think it was a problem. I thought it was just music and dancing like usual. He thought that people were joining in the party he was having for murdering this woman. He had previously arrived in the UK from Germany, where he had already been granted legal residency documents, but he thought the going was better in the UK because our treacherous politicians keep giving them money. The scale of the tragedy is unimaginable. There were some quotes in a Sky News article that I read from Rhiannon's family that are harrowing but worth reading, because we need to know the scale of the brutality that's being inflicted upon us. I just want, the entire reason for this stream is, as in the title, never forget this is a choice. None of these people ever needed to be here. Per capita does not matter. It matters in terms of making risk assessments when you're walking around on the street and you pass an individual who may or may not be more likely to commit a crime against you, have your wits about you, especially if you're a woman. But per capita does not matter in terms of immigrant crime, because none of these people ever needed to be here. If we did not import foreign criminals in the first place, these lives would not be ruined or ended. So this is Mr. Majek. Happened on the 20th of October in 2024. A 2-week trial heard that Majek had previously been reported to security at the hotel after spookily staring at 3 female staff members for prolonged periods. They always have this look. Same with the African illegal migrant outside the Britannia Hotel in Canary Wharf. The same with Axel Rudikabana, the Southport murderer, who killed 3 young girls and stabbed 11 more in Southport in July of 2024, who said that he was so happy about his youngest victim being just 6 years old. No man who ever looks like this, who has this dead-eyed, soulless stare, who bears the complexion of thousands of years of subterranean IQ, should ever be allowed in our country. They won't belong here. Even if they don't commit crimes, they won't be productive citizens. They won't fit into our civilization. They won't continue it. We should leave them alone for a few hundred years and see if in their civilizational petri dish things eventually work out, or they collapse of their own accord. But either way, that outcome shouldn't bother me. And providing this man with housing at my expense certainly wasn't worth the life of Rhiannon Sky White. And it certainly wasn't worth her son being orphaned and raised by her sister. Majek, who is from Sudan and claims to be 19 years old, because of course we still haven't subjected him to an age test, because verifying the age of this murderer would be against his human rights, told Wolverhampton Crown Court he was at the hotel for asylum seekers at the time the 27-year-old was attacked. Yet again, these people don't understand consequences. They will just lie. Lying is actually encouraged. from his part of the world. Not just the concept of takia, but the concept of advantaging your family and clan and the Ummah against non-believers, but also just the idea that if you don't lie, you will be lied to by someone else, you will be scammed in this low-trust third world dystopia, and so you may as well lie and take what you can get away with, because other people will do it to you, and you're the sucker if you allow it to happen to you. So he just lied, despite multiple reports, despite being caught on CCTV, despite being found covered in her blood. Majek, who is 10 inches taller than Miss White, walked to the Calmore Green area of Warsaw after the attack by Bia and was recorded on CCTV wiping blood from his trousers. He returned to the hotel at 12:13 a.m, changed his blood-stained flip-flops for trainers, and was seen dancing with other residents in the car park. Asked by defense Casey Gurdeep Garcha, it's just immigrants defending other immigrants for the appalling crimes they commit against the natives. You shouldn't be here either. When asked by Gurdeep if he was at the train station when Miss White was stabbed, he said no. Just denied it. Just lied. Majek said he had spent time in Libya, Italy, and Germany before arriving in the UK to claim asylum in July last year. They literally shop around and arrive in Britain because we give them the most money to commit these heinous crimes. We are actively incentivizing our own murder and replacement. Sorry, not we, our treacherous elites, who should themselves be replaced, because all of this is a choice. But he spent time in Libya. Thank you very much to our neoliberal policy establishment for destabilizing that region and ignoring the warnings of Colonel Gaddafi, who got sodomized to death in a sewer, who said, if you topple me, the floodgates will open from North Africa and Sub-Saharan Africa, and Europe will be swamped. Wow, I'm so glad we fought them over there so we didn't have to fight them over here. No, instead, we're paying for them to be here while they kill us. He's going to be sentenced on the 15th of December, when victim statements are going to be read out in the court. Addressing relatives of Miss White, the judge said, no one sitting in this court can have failed to be struck by the quiet dignity you've all shown through this most demanding 10 days in court. It's unimaginable for those who have not had to go through that. I thank you and I admire you for it. Well, an increasing number of families are going through this completely optional tragedy, thanks to the horrors inflicted upon us by our political class. Rhiannon's sister, Alex, said her sibling always wanted to make everyone else around her happy. No matter what her day had been, she always wanted to make everyone around her happy. She prioritized her family. That was the most important thing to Rhiannon. Obviously, she has a brother and 3 sisters, and my mum, who is her best friend. Rhiannon is the second youngest, but our baby sister would always say, I'm your big sister, because Rhiannon was very soft. No matter what, we always wanted to protect her. That was our priority most of our life, because Rhiannon never saw danger and never understood how scary the world could be. I'm raising Rhiannon's son, and I cannot express the unimaginable pain of having to sit down and explain to a 5-year-old that the one person who loves him more than anything will not be coming home. The screams of pain from this beautiful boy will haunt me for the rest of my life, but we will never let Majek haunt him. This child should never have had to experience the pain and misery that he has caused. And that is the number one message. This boy should never have been orphaned, because this dead-eyed freak should never have been in our country in the first place. And he was only here because the state was paying him with our money to stay here. And now, he is going to sit in a prison cell for however long. He could be deported immediately, or we could hang him. That would be the sensible option. Spare the taxpayer, rather, the expense of his upkeep. Because he should have been in some ungovernable shithole in the Horn of Africa, rather than ever hoping to harm a hair on the head of Rhiannon Skywhite and her son. But instead, he came over here, he was in a hotel at our expense, he'll now be in a prison at our expense, and likely appeal on some ECHR grounds to the right to family life or prevention against torture should he return to his shithole homeland. He will appeal deportation and be stuck here forever. The injustice is just bottomless. And there's more. So the grooming gang inquiry has collapsed because, of course, the Labour government never wanted to do it anyway, and now there are 5 grooming gang survivors, rape gang survivors, including Fiona Goddard, who her and her father have been very vocal about the atrocities that she experienced. Ellie Reynolds and then 3 other who have gone on record under pseudonyms to say that the inquiry has tried to obfuscate the racial and religious motivations of their Pakistani Muslim predators, and that one woman, I've had to archive this here, one woman, Sabah Kaiser, who herself is apparently a victim of child sexual exploitation, but not by the gangs, told the other victims, contributing to the panel, stop blaming brown men. Well, turns out said brown men blame their white English child victims. There was a report in 2013 by the Muslim Women's Forum who said that, of course, Muslims themselves are the victims of pernicious stereotyping about the rape gangs, where they interviewed a series of young boys, young Muslim boys, asking them about what they thought about the gangs. And they said, or about the girls, and they said, well, you know, white girls always cry rape because actually they're more promiscuous, and they were asking for it. I'll go through that on some point, a different video or a different stream. But there's just a bottomless list of examples of the men justifying these attacks on children. As Katie Lamb infamously read out the transcript of the trial, where a perpetrator said, "We're here to fuck white girls and fuck the government." There was the Newcastle perpetrator who was caught by the police for riding a train without a ticket, of all things, and he said, "White women like you are only good for one thing: sexual abuse." Of course, there was Ella Hill, the pseudonymous survivor who had written in The Independent that she was called white slags, white whores, white see you next Tuesdays, told to stand in the corner and face the wall while they shouted epithets and Quran verses at her, that she was denigrated for her religion, or perceived religion, being kuffar, and her race. And yet, Sabah Kaiser, who's a co-ethnic of the perpetrators, tries to run cover for their motivations. Actually, you know, someone else who ran cover for this was Fraser Nelson. Fraser Nelson, my arch nemesis, the second worst editor of The Spectator. This was Ella Hill's quote, by the way. This one. "They made it clear to me, because I was a non-Muslim and not a virgin, and because I didn't dress modestly, they believed I deserved to be punished. They said I had to obey or be beaten." Fraser Nelson, though, thinks that it's a good idea to obfuscate this. So I had to screenshot this again because Fraser Nelson blocks literally anyone who points out the contradictions in his worldview to them, because Fraser Nelson knows exactly what he's doing. He makes a comfortable living being Squealer from Animal Farm and excusing all of the crimes of the regime because he genuinely believes there's no difference between Habash Kabatu and his own children because they're all immigrants and all British as you and me by setting foot on British soil. Nelson wrote in his odious Times column in Oldham and Rochdale it was grooming gangs of mainly Pakistani heritage, but in Blackpool it was white men acting alone. Not true. Actually, Blackpool is where Charlene Downs was raped, abducted, and probably ground into kebab meat and hidden, her body hidden in the grouting tiles of the kebab shop as her alleged murderers bragged about before being let off on a mistrial because the police had improperly handled evidence. So, yeah, in Blackpool it was rape gangs too. In Glasgow, drug addicts. Also, Muslim rape gangs operating in Glasgow. Same evil, different faces. An inquiry cannot confine itself to only one aspect of this scourge. Actually, it can. I think it was the original Casey inquiry in 2015 that did a broad approach to all kinds of child sexual abuse, and therefore the Pakistani grooming gangs got lost among the fray. Intentionally so, obviously. They repeatedly buried by the Home Office, who its sizable Muslim network wants to look the other way regarding the atrocities, optional atrocities, that its policies and its co-ethnics inflict upon the natives of this country and their children. But Fraser Nelson wants to, yet again, just deflect from the perpetrators who never needed to be here in the first place, who will always do this. And Fraser Nelson, remember, inadvertently restarted the discourse about the Pakistani rape gangs when, in his final Telegraph column in late December, said that Britain was undergoing an integration miracle, and when challenged on this by Sam Bidwell at the time, and then Max Tempers, doubled down and said, well, you know, Muslims in the country is just like battles between Catholics and Protestants. I don't happen to remember any Catholic rape gangs going around and preying upon the Protestant peasants in the English countryside, Fraser. I don't happen to remember that. Maybe you can enlighten us. Maybe you can explain to us why your own children think your rendition of British values is bullshit. But no, he knows exactly what he's doing. He knows he's denying this stuff. And so, yeah, the grooming gang inquiry totally collapsed. Now one of the senior police officers who was tipped to lead the inquiry has withdrawn his name. These women are calling on Jess Phillips to resign, but for some reason this feminist government exists purely to protect the feelings of its other arch-feminists and to endanger women with importing rapey migrants while paying an outsized amount of emphasis to Andrew Tate clips, because the Cabinet Office is now monitoring social media content and trying to pay influencers to counter-signal red pillars, by the way. And, you know, I don't like Andrew Tate. He's a pimp turned imam. I'd throw him in prison for his OnlyFans and camming operation. But the fact the government is paying influencers to counter-signal, whether it's anti-feminist or anti-migrant narratives, shows you the level of gaslighting that they are running as an operation, because they know this is happening. They know that they are sacrificing girls on the altar of multiculturalism, and yet they're telling you to accept it anyway. So it is a choice, and they've made the choice for you. They have made the choice to endanger your family members. Never forgive them for this. I think it was, is it Sam Hyde who tweeted something like, you know, they want your family dead, your children raped and castrated, and they think it's funny. Well, they certainly think it's funny. Never forget it. So, Nigel Farage has now, he convened a press conference a few days ago and announced that he wants to chair a parliamentary committee into the rape gangs because the Labour government are dragging their feet. They still haven't set the terms of reference. Shabana Mahmood, the woman who said that her Sunni Muslim faith is the most important thing in her life and influences everything she does, when she became Home Secretary, and she's, you know, already wedded herself to the definition of Islamophobia proposed in 2019 by the all-party parliamentary group on British Muslims, concocted by Hope Not Hate, that said that conversations about the grooming gang are rooted in anti-Muslim stereotypes. She already supported that. She, when she was appointed Home Secretary, is now in charge of appointing the head of the grooming gangs inquiry, because Yvette Cooper didn't actually appoint anyone despite announcing the inquiry. So they haven't set the terms of reference. They have a Muslim Home Secretary presiding over a Muslim activist Home Office, who were, until the other day, concocting an Islamophobia definition until a bunch of Sikhs submitted a lawsuit against it. I'm really glad my country is becoming the battleground for the dueling religious ethnopolitics of the Indian subcontinent. Until then, they were in charge of leading the inquiry. Now the inquiry seems to have collapsed. Nigel Farage brought a survivor, I think her name's Ellie, to the conference, and they announced that they're going to do a parliamentary committee to this. Now, of course, as Adam Wren has pointed out, this doesn't have any statutory powers. People that are summoned before the committee can just basically do the American equivalent of pleading the fifth, say, I don't recall. So it doesn't have any police teeth, but I still applaud the effort anyway to try and bring media attention and transparency to this, just as I applaud Rupert Lowe's privately funded rape gang inquiry, consulting the victims and going around Westminster and media censorship. You know, more voices on this is always good. However, as Matt Goodwin has tweeted this clip, during the Q&A session, all the reporters could ask about was Sarah Pochin's comment about too many black people being in adverts. And she was citing a Channel 4 study, by the way, that said that black people are in 50% of adverts, despite being 4% of the population, according to the 2021 census. Don't worry, that number's up thanks to Boris Johnson. You know, I'm glad that Habash Kabatu is getting representation in British adverts right now. But all they could do is ask about that. And so Ellie, survivor in question, decided to respond and call this out, and she is too right. And I want to play this clip yet again to remind you what the media and the government are ignoring when they deflect, and what they're inflicting upon us, and they know they're inflicting upon us, when they import these men in our country in the first place.
I find it quite, overwhelming as well that every single one of these medias has said something about a comment that was made by Sarah, which is understandable, absolutely fine. Yet it's taken medias decades to recognise grooming gangs that are coming over and raping our children because they're white. That is also racially motivated, and it is racist. I find it quite...
Well done for Farage for applauding that. Remember that they do not consider anti-white racism because they think that all Westerners have a burden upon them because the realization of the blank slate was delivered to us a few hundred years ago, to roll the light of universal liberalism across the globe, both at home and abroad. And in Lion King fashion, everywhere the light touches is our domain, and therefore any of us who are guilty of noticing differences are inexcusably ignorant, and injustices perpetrated against us are just teething pains for the egalitarian utopia that will come into being. I mean, yet again, remember what the woman in question said. Can't remember what tab I had it in, but remember what the woman in question said about the blank slate being, again, an article of faith for her. That they truly believe that they are fundamentally, deep down, and exactly equal to you and me. So, speaking of grooming gangs, let's go through the last few countries I have on the list here. Scotland. As of yesterday, there was a grooming gang. Romanian grooming gang, apparently. Romanian. Alexandra Bugiena, Caitlin Dobre, Christian Urlaretenu, Remus Stan, and Marian Kumpaniazu, Romanian. Or Roma. Where's Roma from? Oh, it's the Indian subcontinent. Anyway, don't look very ethnically European to me. But anyway, Romanian grooming gang was jailed for raping and sexually abusing 10 women in flats across Dundee in Scotland. Why does Dundee sound familiar to you? Don't worry, we'll get onto it in a minute. So the 4 men and 1 woman plied their victims between 16 and 30 with drugs at various properties between 2021 and 2022. There was a similar gang being run out of Scotland a few years ago as well. I remember doing research for this there's a grooming gang research paper I was working on for an institution for a little while, and it's now just been shelved because, and this is a topic for another day, no one on the right can get their shit together and build an institution, save my friends over at Restore Britain, it seems. It wasn't that institution, by the way. But there was another rape gang operating along similar lines in Scotland where essentially the woman would act as the pimp because she'd got hooked on drugs that the gang were selling and would bring other women to parties, and I say women, often children, to be then abused by largely Muslim men. Now, if you think of Dundee, do you remember this? The girl in question who was carrying around an axe and a knife. So, why was she carrying that around? Why was she brandishing a weapon in Dundee? We now found out, of course, that the guy in question filming her was a Bulgarian criminal with like an AK-47 tattooed on his neck. I think he was set for deportation at one point and wasn't deported. How many of this, and I think it was Stefan Molyneux who tweeted this at the time, how many of this girl's friends had been preyed upon or exploited by said Dundee gang that was operating in her town? She's been utterly vindicated now. Now, I want to raise this because you need to remember that over at Unheard, Freddie Sayers, the editor of Unheard, I think it was Kathleen Stark who wrote an article on this, had made jokes about this and had said that this was a conspiracy theory, the online right are turning this girl into some sort of young Boudica for no reasons other than racism. Do you understand what atrocities are being visited upon children up and down this country? Up and down our union, in every town and city. And yet again, folks like David Lammy think this is funny. We should always return to this image. This is the face of the ruling class and what they think of what is being done to children by these people like her. It's also happening across Europe, of course. So you've obviously heard that Ireland's kicked off again. Ireland has a tendency to go up in flames anytime someone who doesn't need to be in Ireland, one of the new Irish, again, latent GDP rocket fuel, I'm sure, commits a heinous crime against its children. We all remember the Irish immigrant who was in Ireland for ages. I think he got Irish citizenship when he stabbed a teacher and 2 children. There were protests last year. Well, now we've got an African asylum seeker, fake refugee, illegal migrant, who seems to have abducted a girl, 10 years old, Irish girl, brought her onto hotel premises and raped her, allegedly. He needed an interpreter because, of course, he speaks just perfect Gaelic. So he had been allegedly sexually assaulted by a foreign male staying at a Dublin hotel, a state-owned asylum hotel, by the way, because these battery farms, yet again, whether being directly subsidised or owned by the state, subsidised to the tune of millions of pounds a day in Britain. I think it's like 15 billion now. All the contracts are going to cost us. So they are basically wards of the state. They are the foot soldiers of what is meant to be an egalitarian utopian revolution, but is instead just heinous crimes committed on the indigenous population for the crime of being white. And this is why Ireland has kicked off again. And it's even more frustrating because, and I've discussed this with Lorcan Price, my friend, he's a barrister at ADF International. The episode is coming out deprogrammed on the New Culture Forum at 7 o'clock on Thursday. But the Irish political system seems incapable of generating true patriots to stand up for it. I mean, if you're relying on Conor McGregor, who has a questionable history of using extracurriculars, if you're relying on him for understanding the inner workings of government and being a statesman, you're in a pretty desperate position as a group of Irish patriots. Why does the Irish political system, much like the political systems across Europe, find itself incapable of generating people who can substantively represent its population? Is it that the parties will not allow them to rise through the ranks, as is the case in Britain? The yoke is lightening slightly with the appointment of my friend James Orr to cultivate talent and generate policy in Reform UK, but still Reform does not have someone of the calibre of J.D. Vance, who James Orr has mentored. I hope that changes, but even in the AFD, for example, I mean, the AFD's got some good politicians, don't get me wrong, and Alice Weidel seems likeable, but she's no Caesar. Like, why do we find ourselves with such a dearth of statesmen? We have Rupert Lowe in Britain, but he's been completely relegated to being an independent because Nigel Farage didn't like some of the things that he said in March because he was right too soon on mass deportations. And of course, Zia Youssef called the police on him. And now Zia Youssef is doing his best based world impression. And look, again, I like the sounds that are coming out of Reform, but why is it that every single political system, even in the United States, I must say, despite me liking J.D. Vance and Stephen Miller and having friends in the administration, find it incapable to say Muslims don't belong here? They're incompatible with our civilization. It's not a purely ideological thing. You can't unpick centuries of cousin marriage from low IQ, low impulse control, high rates of criminality, and the inability to extend moral consideration outside the family, clan, or honor. Like, it's kind of, the hardware and software are just baked in at that point. Sorry. That will get me totally cancelled, by the way. Oh, you're saying that people aren't blank slates and it's not purely cultural. Yep. Sorry, I am. Culture actually has a symbiotic influence on family formation, and it turns out it's a lot easier to be liberal and individualistic when your parents aren't siblings or cousins. As has been the case for centuries in England, where the rate of cousin marriage was infinitesimal, non-existent. It was a couple of kings and queens who didn't make very prudent decisions themselves, and that was about it. Why is no politician capable of saying Hinduism does not result in America? Why is no politician capable of saying, turns out that these foreign rapists breaking into our country via the channel are not indistinguishable from the Dutch Jews fleeing the Holocaust? Maybe said descendants of Jewish immigrants should consider that they're not in one big indistinguishable vat of grey goo called immigrants, and should stop lobbying for the arrival of Muslims who want them dead because they've read the hadiths quite closely and say that Judgment Day will only come about when you declare war on the Jews. Like, it would be great, actually, if there were fewer liberal Jews, fewer demented, pro-open borders, ideological communists who are self-hating whites in my country, who would keep opening our borders for the types that I showed in the video earlier, who are telling them, no, bruv, we're not on the same side. Because all of these people have been let in, again, by our treacherous politicians, our media class, the NGO activist complex that turns out got funding from USAID as well as your and my tax money. It'd be great if we just had fewer of those people agitating for our replacement and death. But it seems to be a problem intractably across every single country, and all of the right-wing politicians, bar, a couple, but even they aren't speaking in very strong terms, are incapable of saying, these people don't belong here. We don't have to have any of them here, actually. We were just fine when we didn't have these people here. We had our own problems, but that doesn't mean we need to add to the problems by importing people who are going to be guaranteed to be criminals. Actually, this was a topic that was brought up earlier. I know this is stretching on a little bit, but it's important. This is a topic brought up when I had an exchange over Twitter with Catherine Burbelsing, sort of a follow-on from our previous debate. So look, Wolf said, World by Wolf is an interesting Twitter account. He posts some pugilistic takes about other people on the right and some foreign policy opinions that I don't agree with, but also some interesting takes about the state, the hygiene of thought on the British right. So, like many Anon accounts, gems and coal in equal measure. But you should be following with and engaging with these people to create a robust intellectual climate on the right that exists outside of the main gate-kept institutions, like The Spectator, for example. He said he would deport Catherine Burbelsing. because of her ethnicity, because of her previous membership of the Socialist Workers' Party, and because she now pushes multiracialism. Now, I think multiracialism in and of itself is not a bad thing. I know people are going to jump on me all over that. I don't think arbitrary racial bigotry is a good thing for Christians to have. However, that is a uniquely Christian and English perspective, as we can see by the racial hatred demonstrated by the Pakistani rape gangs and the various migrant sex offenders. And so, yet again, yes, exceptions might don't disprove rules. Yes, exceptions might exist. Yes, we might even want some of those exceptions here from culturally compatible nations. But our offence taken to racial bigotry only flows one way. And so, inevitably, by increasing the diversity in a society, you're going to get more racial hatred. So if you want less racial hatred, maybe don't battery farm people who hate white people in my country. So multiracialism, unfortunately, ends up in multiculturalism, whether you like it or not, and it ends up in preventable atrocities being committed against natives because they're white. So I'm not saying people of other races are bad at all. I think it's immoral. However, in total, if you cause two countries to mix together who are culturally distant and ethnically distant, unless it's a handful of Japanese people or a handful of Hong Kongers that we've imported over the last few years on refugee visas, usually it ends in bloodshed. Unfortunately, I wish it wasn't the case. As an Englishman, I wish I could just take people as I met them and we could all just get along. And I do get along with, the Nigerian priest who leads my congregation, or the Indian priest who leads my grandparents' congregation. I'm seeing a pattern here. Usually Christianity is a civilizing force. But unfortunately, that's not the case. Anyway, so Catherine responded to this. Again, I think it's an unjust criticism. We shouldn't treat like Raja Mia and Ben Habib as if they're grooming gang perpetrators and deport them too. I think it's wrong. But she responds, what is it to push multiracialism? The rest Wolf says is true. I wasn't born in Britain. I am of mixed heritage, none of which is white. But ask ChatGPT what would happen if you removed all of us ethnics, 25% of the population. You will see disaster for Britain. Okay, first of all, outsourcing your critical thinking capacities to ChatGPT. Not great. Okay, not a great look. Especially because ChatGPT is not an authoritative source. It's a large language model built on the ideological biases that are either baked into the brains of its creators and what it feeds it, or the data set that is fed into it, which, as we've discovered, is from Reddit. The cuckold HQ that was being actively manipulated by Discord servers run by Democrats in the 2024 election to artificially astroturf Kamala Harris's popularity, because she was about as popular as a bacon sandwich in a synagogue. Anyway, so I responded to Catherine, pointing out that, yes, some of those immigrants may have well ingratiated themselves into our tribe, into our family, into our friendship networks. Some may well have made good contributions to art, to literature, to inventions. But if none of them had been here, Britain would still be a great country. One of the best. In my opinion, of course, the best. Though I do admire America. I enjoy Hungary. I love Japan. But my country would still be spectacular if none of them had ever come here in the first place. And this can be very harsh. And I think this needs to be said because a lot of people are starting to take this trade. You're seeing an increasing number of people make the distinction that Wolf or the likes of Steve Laws makes, which is all of them have to go, regardless of their individual behaviour. Again, I think we can judge by content of character, not by colour of skin. It just so happens that the content of character of the vast majority is left wanting. You're going to get a lot of people that go, if murderers, like the man who killed Rhiannon Skywhite, or sex offenders like Habash Kabatu, or the Pakistani grooming gangs, is the price to pay for having the positively contributing migrants in the country, then the positives aren't worth it, and so they all have to go. And so, you're going to have to contend with that. You're going to have to deal with an argument other than saying, well, you have to have all of us here, otherwise your country would collapse. Because it turns out, when we were over 90% ethnically homogenous between 1066 and 1945, when the Norman conquest left them a 5% genetic footprint on our civilization, and they were ethnically proximate Christians from northern France, when we had maybe a handful of Dutch Jews and Huguenots in our country until the Windrush rocked up and acted like our second Mayflower and caused all of this ethnic strife. We ruled half the world. We were much more intelligent, much more industrious, much more peaceful, and much more prosperous than every other country that existed at the time, with the exception of our ethnic colony, America. So, again, this is no antagonism personally to Catherine. We got on very cordially in that debate, and I hope you see the footage, as Gove promised he would put out when we recorded it. But to say that my country would be a disaster without all of these immigrants is a lie. I'm sorry. It's just untrue, and people are going to be looking at these palpable untruths and pointing out the absurdity of it. And your argument is going to look weak, and the argument for returning these people back to where their ancestors came from, regardless of their behaviour, which again I think is unjust for people that are genuinely nice, that argument is going to get ever stronger. You are going to be engaged in the Sisyphean feat of arguing for your own presence in this country if you say, as a net collective, that if every single person who isn't integrated, who has committed a crime, who is not going to continue our civilization in a way that would be recognizable to our grandparents, has to stay, well, then lots of people are going to go, okay, your terms are acceptable, everyone has to go. And I'm just warning you, because I'm the moderate here, you know? I'm just a sensible guy from before 1945. So, here's the story from Sweden as well. Here's a depressing one. A migrant who raped a girl, age 16, who abducted her after her shift at McDonald's and dragged her into a tunnel in Skel FT. He won't be deported. This is Yazid Mohammed, good Swedish name. Won't be deported because the rape didn't last long enough. Now, the term rape in Swedish law has a slightly different definition. It just means sexual assault. I don't care. Should never have been in the country in the first place. Still should not be in the country. Deportation is too kind. I'm being very, very harsh here because you need to remember that none of this ever needs to happen. They don't need to be here. Oh, yeah, this was the other one as well. So there's an illegal immigrant. She's an Algerian illegal immigrant. Kidnapped, tortured, and killed a 12-year-old girl in France. So the illegal immigrant in question is Darbia Benkered, a woman. And I saw Charlotte Gill tweet earlier in response to the Afghan stabbing in the UK. There should be no Afghan men let in to Britain. No, I'll go one step further. There should be no Afghans in Britain. Not just let in, there should be none here. And turns out that even the women will commit these murders. And they will raise children who, especially if deprived of their father, will become resentful to their host population and then go on and commit more attacks, as the sons of refugees often have. So, Darbia abducted and killed Lola Daviet. Darbia was homeless, by the way. I think she was on a student visa and then stayed milling about in France, where in her deranged state she decided to kill this young girl. She told the court, "I asked for forgiveness. What I did was horrible. That's all I have to say. Tell it to God. And a sane and just civilization would bring your meeting with him forward." The jury convicted her on all 3 charges of murder, rape, and torture after 3 hours of deliberations. She should not have even been in France after overstaying a student visa. And the judge noted, she preyed on Lola for pleasure and the satisfaction of sexual urges. This is the Attorney General. Again, this girl should be at home with her family right now. Okay, I can't even read the details of this case. You can read this in your own time, but it's just harrowing. And what's extra harrowing is the freaks and thugs and open borders communists in France decided to attack a tribute, a memorial to Lola. You know, lighting flares and intimidating members of the public who had gathered around a memorial portrait of Lola to show their solidarity with the family, to say that these people never to be needed in the country in the first place. These people, these black bloc thugs, who, you know, were rioting for communism during Weimar Germany and led to the, frankly, in hindsight, predictable rise of a very violent response to that, which, if you would like to avoid it, don't do this. These people think that the murder of a 12-year-old girl by a woman who never needed to be in the country in the first place is an appropriate place to push their communist politics and to then desecrate an image of her in her honor. The vice of these people is bottomless. We shouldn't have to share a civilization with these people. Not just deport foreign criminals, bring back the punishment of exile, because we cannot live with these people. We can't live with the people who celebrated Charlie Kirk's murder. Halloween's coming up, by the way, and expect to see a lot of American liberals dressed as Charlie Kirk's corpse. As Jack Posobiec said, document it, remember who they are, because you can't share a country with the people that not only want to inflict preventable atrocities on your family members and your daughter, but who also want to kill you for speaking up about it. So why are they here? Well, here's just one egregious case by a human rights lawyer that shows the ideology of the blank slate. An immigration judge ruled that a Syrian man can come to the UK because he's desperately lonely. Bear in mind, this is just after a Syrian jihadist named Jihad decided to stab a bunch of Jews in Manchester on Yom Kippur. That was after, as well, as you would have seen in my previous video. Sorry, my eye is giving me trouble to the viewers. The jihadist in question, he not only had multiple wives, but that ISIS had sent out a warning just a week or so prior to say to their sleeper cell operatives and sympathizers across our countries to commit terror attacks on our soil with knives, with guns, and with cars, which he did before being shot dead by police because he had a suicide vest on. But this immigration judge says that an 87-year-old man from Syria can live in Britain because he's desperately lonely and has been granted the right to live in the UK as his essential care needs were not being met in his home country, and he can benefit from healthcare in Britain. Yazbek's son is a British citizen who has not been able to visit the Middle East due to war and safety risks. Institutional care for the elderly is reportedly not a cultural practice in Syria, so therefore he needs to be stuck in a nursing home at our expense in the UK. Not a single Syrian should be in the UK. Sorry. It shouldn't be happening. We don't need them. I don't need to be paying for the healthcare of elderly Muslims. You can go home and live in the country that you had an entire lifetime to improve and failed to. Your son can join you. These people shouldn't be here. But the mentality of our judiciary, especially after, again, the Second World War, where there's actually a book about this I'm going to cover at some point. Where is it? Staring me in the face. This book, it's Matthew Rosenbaum's Prosecuting Nazi War Criminals. I found a copy in a second-hand Japanese bookshop, and it's fascinating. His argument is basically, we need to set up international institutions, treaties, bodies like the United Nations and the European Convention on Human Rights, because countries can't be trusted to govern themselves, because during the First World War we didn't prosecute some of our war criminals, and during the Second World War the Nuremberg trials needed to happen in order to prosecute Nazi war criminals. Again, not relitigating the justification of the Nuremberg trials. Of course, the people who committed the Holocaust should hang. However, he is then applying this distrust to all people in all times and all places on the premise that a single politics and legal system can govern all men because, yet again, the underlying supposition is the blank slate, all men are equal, and so if we can remedy inequality, remove cultural differences, and create neutral institutions and remove decision-making power from individual political actors who act with virtue and prudence and outsourced it to impugnable procedures who act upon human beings who are meant to be neutral, but of course, as we know, there's no such thing as a neutral institution because they're populated by people who take an interest in and have opinions on politics. But if we can do that and outsource it to neutral laws, then we will have just decisions until the heat death of the universe. And that is what these people think. And so these human rights lawyers think that the laws themselves are beyond reproach and can apply to all men in all times and all places, and so they just so happen to give the unending benefit of the doubt and taxpayer-funded benefits to people who don't share our traditions and yet come to our country and want to benefit from our largesse. Remember, so free speech itself is not an Islamic value. Speech in Islam is a liability because you can commit the sin of shirk by reducing Allah or even Muhammad down to an analogy and depict him, and therefore commit an unforgivable sin and be denied access to heaven. So even free thought and free discourse is a liability in Islamic morality, so censorship is an Islamic value. And so whenever they make appeals to Britain's free speech laws, and when they leverage Islamophobia, a term invented by the Muslim Brotherhood to give terrorists cover, by the way, against us, they are using our own values and judo-flipping them against us. And we are applying those values to ourselves. So we are applying sort of universal liberalism to us, which is acting like an autoimmune disorder, eating away at our own civilization, and allowing low IQ, low impulse control African predators and Islamists to come into our midst, exploit our children, and then be given lenient prison sentences, because we can't really expect better from them, and they'll live up to their blank slate nature, eventually, if we just keep giving them the benefit of the doubt under international human rights law. The only thing we can do is repeal all these laws. Just get rid of them. Literally, just repeal every last one of them. Go back to the common law constitution that Britain had before mass migration and Tony Blair's constitutional revolution, but also, and this is an insight that Orrin McIntyre has kept repeating from Joseph de Maistre, Bertrand de Juvenal. I recommend listening to Orrin McIntyre's latest show, Someone Will Rule, by the way, because it's an excellent, concise primer on how politics and power actually works. But the point being, constitutions and laws are just the codifications of the sentiments of the men who wrote them. And so, if you swap out the people, the law no longer has any standing because it's not written on the hearts and the minds of the people who have inherited it and who now have it applied to them. There is no such thing as an American constitution in an Islamic country. This is why the constitutions of South Africa and Liberia resemble the enlightened constitutions of liberal Europe and America, but they're civil war-stricken shitholes populated by people for whom politics is just, I will steal your stuff and give it to my co-ethnics. And this is why, when you've imported these people into our country, we tend to over-intellectualize politics now, especially like the Green Party, which has become the Islamo-Communist Party, under Mothin Ali and, what's his name, Zach Polanski. Sorry, I forget his name because he actually changed it to be more Jewish. I'm not making that up, by the way. I'm just going to get that up so that everyone believes me. Zach Polanski. His real name's like David or something. And here we go. Zach Polanski. He's a member of a London Assembly, but he's getting like constant airtime because he's a co-leader of the Green Party. Zach Polanski was born David Polden to a Jewish family who'd moved to the UK from Eastern Europe. He changed his name, saying it was important for him to find pride, not shame, in his identity. He selected Zach in homage to the Jewish character from Goodnight, Mr. Tom, and changed his name to Polanski to restore his familial name. So basically changed his name to sound more Jewish. So he's engaging in identity politics against the native population, and probably to also provide himself more cover when he engages in third worldist anti-Israel politics. And again, you can have your perfect criticisms of Israel. I'm abstinent on the issue because I'm not Jewish. But I'm just sick to death of hearing foreign people lecture me about what the politics of my country should be, and Zach Polanski fits that mold. Anyway, I'm sick to death of Britain being a battleground for Islamo-communist race politics, and the reason that we're hearing constantly about this is because our treacherous political class have brought them into the country at the first place, at our expense, against our wishes, and even if they're engaging in democratic politics, but they're lobbying for more of their co-ethnics, ineluctably resulting in these crimes being committed, none of those people need to be here either. Like, we shouldn't have any foreigners in our politics. At all. This is one of the things I brought up in my debate with Michael Gove. There shouldn't be a single non-Indigenous British person or non-Christian governing our country. We are a Christian country. Just as it would be inconceivable for a non-Jew to lead Israel. Not only would they not elect it, but if they got to such a position with demographics where they were electing a non-Jew to lead Israel, or a non-Japanese person to lead Japan, then that would signify the end of their civilization. And this is why they had to install Rishi Sunak against the wishes of both the Conservative Party membership and the native population. So, just wrapping up. The Home Office is going to keep gaslighting us, as Raikou always do. See my previous reporting on that. Saying we'll do whatever it takes to secure our borders. We've removed 35,000 people with no right to be here. Bear in mind, lots of those are paid self-deportations. And we'll get onto in a minute how some of those pan out. And of course, I just point out, except for closing the borders to all the foreign rapists that they keep importing. How's the ratio doing, by the way? That's pretty good. But the last one I'll end on, and again, it shouldn't be laughable because of the atrocities these people commit against our families, but one of the guys sent to France in our one in, one out policy just came back on a dinghy. And it's an exclusive in The Guardian because The Guardian, the treacherous communist rag they are, interviewed him. An Iranian man, and bear in mind we've had multiple Iranian spies smuggling themselves across small boats and in lorries, and our government, per my reporting for Courage Media, has been warned time and time again that foreign jihadist states are sending their spies and mercenaries over here to embed themselves as sleeper agents in our country to then commit terror attacks against us, and the government's ignored it and done nothing about it. Which is the way the likes of David Betts and Richard Kemp and other people have gone public with it, with such information about civil war and ethnic strife. But an Iranian man, sent back to France under the one-in, one-out scheme, returned to the UK on a small boat. The man who wants to claim asylum in the UK, why not in France? Spoke to The Guardian since coming back, because The Guardian are just apparently aiding and abetting foreign criminals now, no shock, and is being held in a UK immigration detention centre and claims to be a victim of modern slavery at the hands of smugglers in northern France. Wow! Who paid the smugglers with Hawala finance, Iranian man? Why were you in the hands of said smugglers in the first place when you could have stayed in fucking Iran? Iran, the Islamic shithole that we do not want to become. So, when the government pantomime that they're doing something about this and throw dead cat strategies like a deal with Albania or France on the table, remember that they are keeping all the laws on the books, which they wrote, because Keir Starmer wrote the textbook for British lawyers like this guy on how to apply the Human Rights Act 1998 and the European Convention on Human Rights. When they pretend to be doing something about it, realise that they're keeping all the laws on the books, the patronage networks which bring these people into the country, the criminal statutes which give them light sentences, the hate speech laws which prevent you from noticing the differences. Remember that they're keeping all of those things in place. Remember they're still funding the NGO industrial complex of human rights lawyers and grievance organisations like the Runnymede Trust. Remember that they're still funding that activist network, Hope Not Hate, who agitate to bring more of these people in and call you a racist if you object to child rape. Remember that they're still doing all these things because they want this to happen. And they want this to happen because, ultimately, they think it's funny. I'm just going to refresh and see if there were any super chats. Thank you to everyone who's engaging in the chat here. I will finish up in a moment because I'm sure my wife has probably gotten home from work and has done so quietly, snuck in the door while I'm ranting and raving and wants me to do her dinner. I missed her I saw her at lunchtime today, so it was nice to drop in on her. I had to go to London, and I make a habit of going to London as infrequently as possible. I had to go in to have a meeting and record an episode of Deprogrammed, but once a week at maximum. You know, I was consulting on a media venture which may still come to fruition because, you know, hopefully 1,000 flowers bloom in this age of needing to build right-wing institutions. It's a topic that I want to get into at some point if it's of interest to you guys, because we sometimes do need these sort of informal discussions to sort of huddle up and act as coach and talk about what's going on wrong along our side, a strategy meeting, if you will. But I had to have one of these, and I tell you what, I was advising this media corporation not to build a big studio in London, not to commit, not only because the taxes are horrible and the business rates are expensive, but nobody wants to go into London. It's desolate and miserable, and it's populated by dead-eyed Bangladeshis sitting behind American candy store shops at obvious money laundering fronts, and those hideous pink tuk-tuks riding round blaring Katy Perry at all hours of the day, being disruptive, and it's a third world slum. And I live on the outskirts because I don't want to spend time in my capital city anymore. I just want to live around my parents, my grandparents, and raise children in the last green and pleasant suburb that hasn't been molested by the Boris wave yet. But, you know, there's still signs of demographic displacement and cultural change in my area as well, so who knows how long I can hold on to my little peaceful corner of the earth for. I'm going to have to click see all. Again, you're going to have to stick with me here because I don't actually know how this sort of thing works. Ivory Leviathan says, Rapey Mr. Bean made me laugh. Big John being called a fat traitor was such a good one too. Laughs amongst the black pills are vital. Thank you, Connor. I've always had the bitchy sense of humor of a 14-year-old girl or a catty gay. Basically, you know, I don't do wonders for the rumors that I was a homosexual theatre kid before getting married, do I? Most people on the right are either what's the Captain Planet meme where they're all putting the rings together and it's like closets, homosexuals, whorish e-girls, failed actors, and it's like the online right. I'm like Michael Knowles in that respect. Thank you to the people who have sent in super chats without any message as well. Look, we've got pay our bills and buy our free speech insurance in this dreadful country that we're seeing the collapse of in real time. A bunch of people have just sent super stickers in, like an adorable chick and a tired cup of coffee. I too have foreigner fatigue at this point. But look, I'll peruse through the comments on this one. If this is a format you guys like, then I'll be sure to engage in it a little bit more. There might be the opportunity for me to mix things up with casual streams versus pre-recorded videos that I schedule and put out. We'll see what works. I understand that I have a tendency to be verbose and not very concise. Trust me, you know those like 20 to 30 minute videos that I've been putting up? That's me putting a time limit on myself. I just have a lot of thoughts and I don't filter anything I say. I genuinely speak off the cuff. I don't have any interceding self-preservation instinct that says, don't say that, Connor. And so when people have said, oh, can you maybe slow down or whatever, I'm afraid I can't. I talk at this speed. You're going to have to just watch me back at a slower pace. I'm afraid. But I'll peruse through this. If there are any super chat questions left after the fact, I'll probably consult them on another stream, and we'll make it a habit. The fact that I don't think before I speak means that at least you can get an honest answer out of me. I've got this policy that I derived from pre-2020 Jordan Peterson, who, you know, we all owe a lot to as young men engaged in politics, that if I'm asked a question, I will answer it honestly to the best of my ability, and the only exemptions before that are, you know, giving out personal information or answering questions on behalf of someone who isn't there to represent themselves. You know, my wife and my family will always stay private. As you can imagine, having been the lead contributor for Courage Media, which was founded by Ayaan Hirsi Ali, and she has round-the-clock security because she has a fatwa on her life, and I don't have the money for security, you can imagine that comes with a set of risks. Like, I was speaking to my wife beforehand, speaking about the dangerousness of London. When did Douglas Murray, for example, or any other high-profile media figure, but someone especially who's pissed off Islam, stop taking public transport because it was too threatening? And I don't know when, but that day's coming. You know, I think the reason that was prompted was that video of the guy on the Beckenham Junction tube, the urban scholar in a tracksuit with a machete, hacking away at someone just on a commuter train in broad daylight. And Beckenham Junction's, you know, not even that far from my jurisdiction of London. And Beckenham's has been run down over the last few years, but it used to be a relatively affluent area. I remember walking around there with my nan, just, you know, perusing charity shops and nice coffee shops and things like that. Oh, it's so sad what's happened to my country. Anyway, before I depress myself further and depress you, thank you all very much for watching. Let's hope that the sign out that I proceed to do actually works. And let me know your thoughts on this format, and I'll have something else out for you, doubtless, as the week rolls on. But appreciate it all. Take care of each other, and keep the faith. Hold your family close. Keep your wits about you. And remember, all of this is a choice. It's a choice been made for us. But we could organize and change things by making different choices.